I heard really, I heard really good things about yours. So there you go. Yeah. So it's good. Hey there, Corinne. How are you? I'm good. Thanks for being here. I'm glad we were able to get a spot for you to do this. It's awesome. Yeah. Hey, Christine. How are you?
Hi, Gail. This is Naomi. How you doing? Good. How was your session? How was the webinar you just came from? Oh, good. Which one did you want? The one in the team. This is my class. Here it is.
Corinne, you're going to share yourself on the screen, or you're going to share slides? What's the plan?
We're going to share our slides, and then I'm going to be on the corner. And
awesome.
Then a little halfway through the presentation, I'm going to be sharing the achievable camera.
Awesome. Cool. And you feel like you got that all squared? I feel like you guys got this locked down.
We practiced.
It sounded really like well planned, like you had it. So I don't feel very worried about you guys all of a sudden. I'm going to let you sort, and then I'm going to jump on one of the other ones to make sure everybody's okay. Okay. I'll be back. I'm not going to go anywhere. I'm just going to shut my camera off for a second. Nope. Hey, Brenda. You're muted. You're not muted. You're muted. How are you today, ladies? You know what? The day's almost, hey, Mimi, how are you? The day is this close to done, so it's great. We only had one session completely come off the rails because the link was out on social media, and it got bombed big time, like scary. Like we had to just go into Zoom and shut the whole thing down for a minute.
Oh,
yeah.
No. Yeah, that's the worst.
But besides that, everything's fine.
Well, why is it bad? I mean, you gotta be pretty excited.
I agree. That's why I just said to Naomi, who I work with, I said, even if these last 6 sessions go right off the rails, the day was a success. It's fine. More positive has happened than bad could happen. So it's okay.
We're not going to go off the rails. So.
If anybody was not going to go off the rails, I feel like this crew could keep it on the rails.
You sent 3 delegates. Come on now.
Come on, this is like a whole thing here. I almost feel like I don't even need to ask you guys if you got it squared. You feel like you're good? Yeah? All right. I'm going to turn my mic off for a second. I'm going to go check on the other 2 rooms I'm trying to figure out.
I'm going to actually share my screen and start our little pre-session if that's okay.
Do what you feel you need to. That's fine. You're welcome. Thank you, guys. Trish, don't make this come off the rails. We just had a conversation that this is going to be okay. All right. I'm coming back. I'm keeping my eye on you guys. Thanks.
Okay, try saying something now.
Corinne, this is a good sign. I see the slides and I see you and I see it all ready to go.
Yes.
Awesome. I knew you would have it all under control. I was not worried. Plus you had Sarah in here to just give you moral support. How could it go wrong? No, it's perfect. Instead of trying to make all you guys co-presenters, we just said leave it open and we'll watch the sessions and make sure nothing bad goes down. So that was our plan. It worked. So I think we'll be okay. All right, so you guys are good. I'm going to go. I'm still missing a presenter in one room, so I'm going to go figure that out. I'll still be floating around.
Yeah, me too, so I can't complain. Thank you so much for doing that.
Hey, everybody, it's Mike. I'm just popping in to say that I don't see your presenter yet in the list, so hang tight. You still have a couple minutes, but I just wanted you to make sure you heard somebody in here, and you guys heard me setting up the other sessions, so figured I would at least pop on and say hi. All right, so we're waiting on Emily. You guys are looking for creating meaningful and differentiated opportunities for choice making. That's the session you guys are selecting, and we still have 6 minutes, so I feel confident she'll pop on in a minute. So thanks again for being here. Hi, Emily. You're still muted.
Can you hear me?
Now I can, yes.
Okay.
How are you?
Thank you. How are you?
I am good, thanks. I
Good.
pre-warmed up your group and said, don't worry, I'm sure she's coming. Everything's fine.
Sorry.
No, you're fine. It's okay.
We're here.
Everything's good. Are you going to share slides? Are you just going to talk? What are we?
Share slides, please.
Okay, let's see. And I'll keep an eye to make sure it all works before I bug out to go to do a different one.
Okay. So should I hit share screen?
Yeah, you share yours and then we'll make sure it comes across.
Okay.
That's a good sign. That is a good
Working?
sign. Oh, yes, it is. Awesome.
Okay. So we're all set.
Cool. Very good. I'll be floating around if you need any help.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks. Okay. Hi, everyone. I think everyone's muted, but hopefully you can all hear me. I guess we'll just wait till 3 o'clock to start so that give everyone a chance to get in here. Okay, so it looks like we have a few people joining, but we'll just wait the last 2 minutes for everybody. And so I hope you all found the Google Doc. So there's a couple of resources in there. And as far as sharing any of the slides, if you guys want access to that, I'll say this all at the end of the presentation again for everybody. But if you want a copy of the slides, you can just email me. I'll put my email up at the end, but it's just emily@inclusivetlc.com. And I'd be happy to send you a copy of the slides. And again, I'll say all that at the end and I'll put my email up. Okay, so it looks like we're about ready to start. It's 3 o'clock. So hi, everybody. My name's Emily. I work for InclusiveTLC. Inclusive, we're an assistive technology company, and we do hardware and software. So lots of switches, joysticks, eye gaze, and then switch and touch accessible educational software and activities. So if you're familiar with Help Kids Learn, that's us also. So that's a little bit about who we are. My role there is I am the curriculum specialist. So I kind of take our products and apply them to how you guys might be using them in the classroom, and then create resources to help support you guys in how to take different assistive technology products and implement them in different ways, and kind of how you can use these to help your students reach their learning goals. So that's a little bit about me and Inclusive. This presentation is creating meaningful and differentiated opportunities for choice making. So we're gonna go ahead and get started with that. I'm going to turn my video off just because that's going to distract me. So I hope that's okay with everyone, and then we'll just focus on the slides. Okay, so like I said, I'm the curriculum specialist, and one product that I had, oh, I'll turn on captions also. There we go, that's working. So one project that I had was with our program called Choose It Maker. So it's a framework program to create your own question and answer choice activities. So Choose It Maker looks a little something like this. The top image is what your editing page looks like, and the bottom is what a completed activity looks like.
Find the odd one out. Bath. Shower.
So you have a question up top, and then, let me see if I can show you that from the beginning again. Oops. There we go. So there's the question up top, and this one was an errored activity, so we were looking for a correct answer. When you give it, you get a little animated reward response. So with this program, you can make lots of different styles of activities and get quite creative with it. But we found that teachers were using it for a lot of really basic stuff, like this find the odd one out activity. So that made us start looking at some kind of supplemental resources that we could create. And first was a guide for all of the different styles and types of activities that you can create. But then we started looking at it a little bit deeper, and could we use Choose It Maker to actually develop the skill of choice making? So that made us start looking at the concept of what choice making is. What does it look like? What goes into it? And we started kind of breaking it down into these smaller steps, and that's how this presentation was born. So while we started by looking at Choose It Maker, we got a lot more interested in the broad concept of choice making as a cognitive skill. So we broke it down into these small incremental steps, or a roadmap to follow in your teaching practice. So in this presentation, we'll start with this roadmap and outlining all of these small incremental steps, and then we'll discuss ways to put it into practice. So how to use a variety of different access techniques at each stage in the roadmap, and so that whatever your students' cognitive and physical abilities or needs, you can provide practice opportunities to match that and then progress onwards. But before we teach choice making, we have to understand it. So what is it and why is it important? There are two main types of choice making, errored and errorless. So here's just a couple of examples of each, but basically errored choice making, there's a correct answer. Errorless choice making, you can choose whatever you want. So for errored choice making, we're communicating what we know. So this is our check for understanding. Did the students retain the information? Do they know this? Are we meeting these learning goals? This is a way for students to communicate their knowledge. And with errorless choice making, it's an opportunity to communicate our preferences and opinions. So we can make choices about things around us and what we engage in. So this can give students more independence and power over their own environment, and very important for giving our students a voice. So both types of choice making are really just a form of communication. What do we know? How do we know it? Or what do we know? What do we want? Sorry. So how can we promote choice making? How do we teach it? What do we do? What factors do we have to consider? So first, breaking it down into small incremental steps, making it something that's achievable. And the smaller, the better here. So we want our students to be consistently achieving success in the activity. That just leads to less frustration, more positive learning environment, and you can really just gradually build upon these skills. And this is really what that roadmap is that we're going to talk about. Also, selecting the right access method. So just as with any form of communication, we need the right device or way to communicate. So whatever our devices or methods may be, selecting the ones that are appropriate for that individual student. And I say devices plural because we want to use an assortment. And we'll discuss the why for that later, but we want to be sure that we're using devices appropriate for that student's physical access abilities. So are we using switches with our switch users? Simple stuff like that. Next is choosing appropriate content. So asking questions that match your student's cognitive level as well as their interests. So in terms of cognitive level, can they understand what is being asked? And I always recommend starting with really easy content. So as you're developing this new skill of choice making, you want your students to be successful. So making it really easy as possible at first and focusing on developing that choice making skill. And then as that choice making skill develops, then you can increase the difficulty of the content that you're asking. Also using content that they're interested in. So personalizing your activities to your students. Ask about mom and dad, their favorite toys. If they love superheroes, make a bunch of superhero activities. But make it meaningful. It'll be more motivating, students will be more engaged, more successful, and you'll just help build upon these skills. Again, that's particularly important in the beginning, and then as they progress in their choice-making abilities, the content can get a little more difficult and maybe not be quite as interesting. Finally, providing many opportunities. So do choice making throughout the day and across different areas. So sometimes we've seen choice making time, so a section of the day where students work on specifically choice making. And while that's definitely an easier way to carve out time, it's not always as authentic. Choices happen in the real world, so our practice should reflect that. So finding opportunities in daily activities. So example, if you're just playing with switch adapted toys, you could make some errorless choice making about choosing between the different toys, or errored questions about identifying a certain toy. So just finding authentic opportunities and stuff. And another thing to mention here is having different people work on this stuff with the student. So if you're the only one working with them on the choice making, they might make choices for you, but then not for the SLP, or not for the classroom teacher or the OT. Or they might do it in therapy, but not in the classroom or not at home. So just make sure that you have a team and that your students practicing this stuff with different people and in different situations. So give homework to parents, which I guess right now is a lot of homework for parents. We're all working from home. But yeah, so making it a skill that they can generalize across situations. Also, lots of practice at each step. So taking it slow, achieve lots of success before you move on to the next step. Some kids might need to do something successfully 5 times before progressing, but a lot of our kids need more than that. They might need to do something 50 or 60 times for it to really stick. But just make sure that you're achieving lots of success before you move on too fast. Okay, so now that we know what to keep in mind as we teach this process, what does this process look like? What are we doing when we're making a choice? So first of all, there's some kind of question. Something is being asked of us. So we have to be able to understand the question itself, but we also have to understand the concept of a question. A question requires a decision and a response. So recognizing that structure and also recognizing the type of question that's being asked, so whether it's errored or errorless, and then what kind of response is required. Do you need to give a correct response or is it more free choice? We have to understand the different response options. So each one carries its own meaning and has different consequences. We have to be able to make a decision. In an errorless question, we have to choose what we want over the other options. Or in an errored question, recognizing that there is a right and a wrong answer, and then being able to select the correct one over the incorrect one. And finally, we have to be able to communicate our decision. We need an appropriate method to communicate our response. So we need to be equipped with the right tools to make that response physically accessible. So breaking this down a little more, these are the big main steps that we can follow for choice making. So this is the initial part of that roadmap. There's sub-steps within these, and we're going to go into detail and break each one down, but this is the basic flow of what your major goals are. And you can see here that there's 2 paths to follow. The red path is for errored questions and the green is for errorless. So these 2 boxes in the middle left really only relate to errored questions. So you can follow the different paths of the roadmap based on what your goals are. And you can bounce around within it depending on what you're working on at that time and what your students are ready for. So these are those sub-steps. We'll do a quick overview of this first, and then we'll dive deeper at each stage when we start talking about implementation and applying it in practice. So we start with understanding and responding to a question. And this tackles that first step of understanding conversational flow. So here in this step, we don't have a choice yet. We're just prompting with a question and a single target item, and then getting the student to give a response and know what that response means and that it has meaning. Then in that next step, then we introduce a second item. There's still no correct or incorrect answers, but recognizing that different response options have their own meaning and different consequences. And that kind of gets us here to very early errorless choice making between 2 items. So then from there, we could follow the green path and build upon those errorless choice making skills, or we can follow the red for errored choice making. And if we go with errored choice making, then the next step is simply to be able to recognize an errored question as something that requires a specific response. So moving from open-ended questions like, what do you want, to something more specific like find the teddy bear. So we introduced this by adding a blank distractor item. So this is an incorrect option being introduced, but we're making it as obvious as possible not to choose that one because there's nothing actually there. And then from there, we go on to using a real distractor item. So they're choosing a correct answer over another more reasonable option. But we do this very slowly. So starting with something that's very different, keeping it easy, and then gradually making your distractor item more and more similar to your target item so that the choice becomes less obvious and more of a difficult and realistic choice. And that is early errored choice making. So then from there, you have your last 2 steps, and these can be done in no particular order, and you can bounce around between them. But just asking more cognitively challenging questions. So up until now, we've been doing it with familiar and very motivating material. This is where we can start making that a little more challenging and complex. And then we can also increase the number of response options. So again, up to this point, we've only had 2 choices. This is where we can start adding in more. And more options is great for errorless questions because it gives a student a wider variety to choose from, and more options for them to select for themselves. And errored questions, it's great because it gives us more confidence that these choices are purposeful. So it's not just a lucky guess or a 50-50% or 50-50 chance of it being right. So yeah, that's adding in more response options. So this is the roadmap. This is what we've put together and what we think makes up the cognitive skill of choice making and a good approach to advance and build upon these skills. But again, it's something that we created. So it's a very large progression, covers a wide ability level, starts with very simple, just cause and effect of can you simply respond to one target item, and then progresses all the way to making complex choices between multiple abstract options. So it's a large progression. But a couple things to keep in mind, this is just a guide. Again, like I said, we put it together. You might have some different ideas and adjustments. Also, all of our kids are unique. It's not cookie cutter, so we need to adjust based on their needs. And you guys are the ones that know your students best, so adjust accordingly. A couple of key considerations also. Students are going to start all in different places in this progression. Some will have already mastered that first step of cause and effect. So you might start with them already doing errorless choice making, and then you want to build upon that or work on errand or add in more response options. So kids are going to start in different places, and they'll also differ in how far they progress. So not all students are going to make it all the way through, but if you can advance a step or two, you can still open up a lot more possibility. So even just from step 1 to step 2, you're going from cause and effect to errorless choice making between 2 things. So again, start in different places, finish in different places. It's not about where they start or where they finish. It's about building upon your skills and advancing. Okay, so now we've done an overview of the skills and how they build upon each other. Let's put it in context. What kinds of opportunities can we provide at each stage of the progression? And what do those activities look like? So we're going to talk about a lot of different devices and methods, and I think it's important to use a variety of these in your practice. So like I mentioned, this presentation grew from Choose It Maker. So while yes, you could follow the whole thing using just that and creating different activities with a lot of topic variety, that can still limit the understanding. Just a wider variety of practice methods let students engage with choice-making material in different ways, and they're better able to generalize that cognitive concept of choice-making as a skill. As we discuss the devices, just bear in mind some obvious factors that will influence the methods that you'll use. One is accessibility. Obviously, you're not using picture cards if your students cannot physically use those. And then cognitive understanding. If you want to make choices on screen, can your students understand an image representation of an object or of a concept? And we'll scaffold we'll touch on how to scaffold some of these adjustments, how to scaffold some of these and make adjustments. But these are just a couple of factors to take into consideration as you decide which of these practice methods to use. So before we start, just a quick background on some of the methods and devices that we're going to talk about today. First is Choose It Maker. So this is the framework program to create your own question and answer choice activities. So you have your question or your prompt at the top. You can have between 1 to 8 answer choices. You select which one or ones will be accepted as correct. And then you can add unique reward sounds to each ones or to each of the answers that you'd like to. Or you can just use the default rewards. But basically it's just creating your own accessible question and answer choice activities. real world items, so just physically choosing between real world items. Then we have picture cards, so things like choice boards or any kind of picture exchange systems that you might have. The picture on the paint card is just how we're going to represent everything, but obviously when we're talking picture cards, we're talking about anything related to this. Speech generating switches. Okay, so up on the top left, we have the Big Mac. That's a single switch communicator. So you press the switch and it plays a single message that you've recorded in. We have the iTalk2 next to it. So this is 2 switches. Each one plays its own message. So you could have Apple on the red switch and then orange on the yellow switch. And then bottom left, we have the Smooth Talker. So that's a switch communicator that has 6 different modes that you can put it in. We're only going to talk about 3 of those today. We'll talk about single message mode, which is basically just like the Big Mac. Choice mode, which you plug in an external switch and then it becomes just like the iTalk2. So again, one switch plays one message, the other switch plays a different message. And then the other mode that we'll use is prompt mode, which is just auditory switch scanning. So you use your external switch to scan through a series of messages at half volume, so one at a time, line up the message that you want, and then you press the main switch to communicate that message louder. And then the bottom right is the activity, which we'll just briefly touch on at the end. Environmental control units. So on the left, we have the power link. So this is for any electrical appliance with an on-off switch, making it switch adapted. So here you're controlling 2 different lights with 2 different switches. And then we also have on the right is the iClick, which is same concept. You can use it with switches or you can use an iPad. So your iPad becomes your switches. So you click the buttons to operate the electrical appliances. Switch adapted toys, press the switch, make the toy animate or do whatever it does. And then on the right, we have the eye control. So same concept as the iClick, but for switch adapted toys. So this is, instead of your switch adapted toy being switch adapted, you can use your iPad. Software and online activities. So anything that's switch or touch or eye gaze accessible. So any of that pre-made content and software and stuff like that. And then ready-made question and answer activities also. So anything that's already made, whether that's online or physical on sheets. Okay, just a quick thing to mention, a lot of the examples that we give can overlap areas. So here you can see how we can choose between Mickey and Minnie on a Smooth Talker, on picture cards, on Choose It Maker. So just as we're doing this, some examples might be in one section that you can also use in others. But yeah, that's self-explanatory. Okay, so now we're going to go through the roadmap one more time, diving deeper and discussing what this might actually look like in practice and using some of these methods. So the first step is understanding and responding to a question. So that's understanding that conversational flow and that when a question is asked, a response must be given and that response that you give has meaning. So we don't have an element of choice making here yet. It's just a single item. And we kind of work backwards. So we start without a question, we just have one target item, and then when the student selects it, they get a generic reward. So meaning that that reward is not related to the item that they selected. So no question, one item, click it, generic reward. For online games and activities, these are those kind of cause and effect activities where you're just making something happen and the thing that you're selecting doesn't influence your reward. So here we have a present that you can click and something's going to come out of it. But it doesn't matter what you're clicking on. You don't know what comes out of that doesn't depend on the target item that you select. So this is just the basic cause and effect. Can you respond? Then we start giving those things meaning, start developing an understanding that the item that you select means something. It has significance. So we're still not introducing a question, but we're just drawing an association between a response and its reward. So with Choose It Maker, again, no question, you have the target item, and now your reward is related to your target item. So in this case, if you click Mickey, you hear Mickey's voice. And can you guys all hear that? Just turn that up. So yeah, so now your reward is related to the item that you selected. So we're just drawing associations. So in online games and activities, now the thing that you click has meaning. So the dog will bark, the cuckoo will come out of the clock. So what you click on, your reward is related to your target item. Real world items, can your student draw the connection that picking up an iPad means playing iPad? If they grab a storybook, it means that book will be read. If they reach for an apple, it's because they want to eat that apple. So just recognizing the meaning of selecting an item, what does that lead to? So with picture cards, if you have some kind of system in place for bathroom requests, your student understands that that picture is a bathroom, that using that picture is a bathroom request. So they communicate the bathroom card, their reward is to go to the bathroom. There's a couple of snack requests on here. You can see that there's 2 versions for Apple. So just, can your student recognize that that Apple symbol carries meaning, or do they actually need a photograph of an apple? So again, just kind of adjusting to your student. This is the same thing with speech generating switch. So we've got the bathroom request again on the left. And this time, so when a student presses their switch, it verbally requests to go to the bathroom. And so with a switch device, when a student presses their switch, they kind of get a double association. So press the Apple switch, hear the Apple request, 1 association, get the Apple, 2nd association. So it's really just reinforcing the meaning that is associated with your target item. So just the bathroom. And you can just see here on the right, some ways that you can kind of scaffold between recognizing a real world item and then recognizing the meaning of its symbolic representation. So if you do want to be using symbolic representations for choice making, this is the stage that you work on that stuff with, just with one single target item and just understanding what that symbolic representation means. Okay, here we have environmental control. So operating an electrical appliance. So here we have a lamp, and this is what it looks like with being controlled by either switches or with an iPad. So that's in iPad mode. So you're just using your button to turn it on and off. And in switches mode, same thing. So just when you press your switch and you hit your target item, and that switch should really have an image of a lamp on it. We shouldn't be using naked switches here. I should change that. But when you press your target item, recognizing what that means. So this can be really useful in drawing connections between that target item that's on screen or on your switch and what it represents, because you're getting a very sensory and very immediate real world reward related to it. And you can do this with any electrical appliance with an on-off switch. So it's great for any sensory items that you might have. And there's also just a lot of fun ideas that you can do with this. So we've got a couple in the bottom corner of just ways to make it engaging and fun. So turning on a jack-o'-lantern or helping to carve the Thanksgiving turkey. But just fun ways to kind of draw connections between that switch and that image that you are hitting, recognizing the meaning behind it and what the meaning that that carries and what your response means. Switch adaptive toys, same concept. Again, very sensory, very immediate reward related to the target item. And so here we do have our switch labeled. And so that's the mistake that we made in the last one. But yeah, so if you're doing this, you're responding to a target item. So you need to make sure that you have a target item to respond to. So no naked switches. So this is kind of a random one, and it wasn't mentioned in our devices, but it is just a fun little extra idea. Using an iPad switch interface to take a photo. So this can just be a really fun and engaging activity. And again, I really should have an image on this switch. But if you press the volume up button when your camera app is open, you can take a picture. So one thing you can do is program your switch interface to send a volume up command. And then you open up your iPad, you open up the camera app, and then whenever your student presses their switch, it takes a photo. So again, for these drawing connection kind of things, so putting an image of a camera on the switch, and then the student knows that when they press that camera, it takes a picture. So just fun way of drawing an association. So after students can recognize that items carry meaning, and there's a lot of ways that you can practice that, the next step is to add in a question to preface that. So you're probably doing a lot of this stuff already, and prompting it with kind of some verbal prompts like, oh, turn that on or do this. So now when you get to this stage, what we want to add a generic question in front of that. So we want to prompt with the form of a question, and it needs to be generic at this stage. And what we mean by that is something that is open-ended. So here we have the question, who's there? So we're not asking where Mickey is. It's not a specific question. It's open-ended. And this is what's going to evolve into errorless choice making. So when we say who's there, it could be Mickey, it could be Minnie, it could be Goofy. So again, open-ended. So then now, again, everything that we just talked about with drawing connections between items and their meaning, doing these same kinds of things, but with a generic open-ended question to preface it. So you're just getting your student used to the concept of, here is a question, you give a response, your response has meaning. So now that we can follow the flow of a question, we can introduce the element of choice. And this is basically the same thing, but with 2 items now instead of 1. So we're going to follow that same basic structure. So first is no question, generic reward, but now you can respond to 2 items. So this is essentially just checking, can you respond to 2 things? Are they always collecting the left image? Can they switch scan? But basically you have 2 items, either can be accepted, and the rewards are generic. So there's not a focus on the different meaning yet. It's just focusing on, can they access 2 response options, and can they cognitively understand the concept of having 2 response options? Ooh. There we go. Okay. Sorry. So we're running a little short on time, so I'm going to have to speed this up. I'm sorry. Okay. So again, present activity. Doesn't matter which one you choose. If you click the left or the right one, you're just going to get a random item come out of it. So your reward isn't related to the selection itself. So next, you want to bring those associations back in. Now that you know that they can respond to 2, now you still have no question, but you have 2 items, and each of them have their own specific rewards. So each of these 2 items have their own unique meaning. So you could click Mickey and hear Mickey's voice, or click Minnie and hear her voice. So real world items, apple or orange is a snack, picking a crayon color. And again, doing things that have an immediate reward feedback. So eat the snack right then, draw immediately. Do these fast fast rewards to draw stronger associations between those 2 things and their own individual meanings. And then as a student progresses, you can delay those rewards a little more. So some options with picture cards. And this is just another idea for scaffolding for switch scanning. So when you're switch scanning, there on a computer screen or an iPad or whatever you're using, there's typically a red box around the item that you're on. And this can be quite a difficult concept for some students. So using a technique like this can help draw some of those parallels. And it's really just a thick red paper, and we just cut out a little red border that we move between each item as we say what that item is. So then when it's over one of the things, the student can communicate a response. So whether that is pressing a switch, gesturing, making a noise, whatever it is. But this can just be a helpful way to transition from those real world choices to on-screen scannable choices and understanding how to switch scan. Okay, so here we have some examples using a smooth talker or any switch communicator. So now that we have two items, we can make two choices, and you can do this with two separate devices. So you could have two Big Macs, or you could have an iTalk 2. And what we have here is a smooth talker in choice mode. So the external switch is plugged in, one switch plays one message, the other plays another message. So cookies or crackers. And each switch always plays that specific message. If you have a student who is a single switch user, you can use partner-assisted scanning to make auditory choices. So in the middle, we have a smooth talker in prompt mode. And the teacher or the therapist can press the external switch to scan through those message options at half volume. And then when the student hears the one that they want, they press their main switch to communicate that response. So again, you can do this partner assisted with the teacher pressing the external switch and the student pressing the main switch. Or if you have someone who can use two switches and is two switch scanning, then they could do it themselves. And then on the right, we just have a song example. We'll just skip that for time's sake. Sorry, this was an hour presentation, so we're just shortening some parts. Okay, environmental control. Again, very immediate rewards. Now that we're adding in that second option, so there are two appliances that can each be controlled independently. So this one we have on direct mode, which can be fun for just free exploration. Students can just play around, press each one for as long as they want. It stays on as long as they're holding it. When they let go, it turns off. So you can really just see how this is such an immediate and temporary reward for while they're pressing it, how it can really help drive those associations home. And in the middle, we're using real photos. And then on the other examples, you can see that we've used symbolic representations. So again, whatever works for your student. Here we have switch adapted toys, same concept as environmental control, just choosing between the two. Okay, and there are so many switch and touch and IDs accessible activities that fit this category because there's so much out there specifically for working on two switches doing different things. So any of those activities where one switch does one thing and another switch does something else, that can be stuff that you're working on at this stage. And games and activities are just very fun and engaging ways to kind of work on this step. Okay, and then finally, just as we did before, we're adding in that question. So again, it's a generic and open-ended question. So it's who's there? Again, not where's Mickey, where's Minnie? So now, again, just doing all the same kind of stuff, but prefacing it with a generic question. And now you are errorless choice making. So it's very simple choices, nothing too complex, not a lot of options yet, but this is that first step in errorless choice making. Okay, so now we could follow this green arrow, or we can go into errored choice making. So if we go into errored, this is the first step, and it's just recognizing an errored question as just that, something that has a correct and an incorrect answer. So far we've only done generic questions, open-ended, and for errorless activities. So this step is focused on introducing the concept of a specific question. Where is Mickey? Where is the apple? Find the disco ball. So at this step, we're keeping it to very specific questions. So a lot of identification type stuff. Sorry, I wasn't supposed to do that yet. So this is a new concept. So first time we're introducing it, we just want to be keeping it very easy. And so the way that we introduce the concept of right and wrong here is through something and nothing. So you can see here, you have the target item that you're asking the student to find, and then a blank option. So can the student select the thing over the non-thing? So this is that first step of with no question, doing it like that. So you see that you can't choose the non-thing, so that's errored. And then next we add in that question. So far we've only done generic questions, so we're not adding in anything new. We have a generic question and then a generic reward again, because again, you're rewarding them for choosing the thing over the non-thing, not for specifically choosing Mickey. So can't choose that, choose Mickey. And then finally, we introduce that specific question. Where's Mickey? And then when we do this, now because it's a specific question, we get a specific reward. So Mickey's voice. So now we're learning that when the question is specific, there is a right and a wrong answer. So introducing the idea that not all questions are errorless. So what this might look like in some other formats, picture cards, again, you could have just a blank card. It could be completely blank, or it could say the word nothing. Again, what works best for your students. With speech generating switch, same thing. Your target item is on the switch. So when you click ball, it would play the word ball. And then if you click the blank switch, it just plays a blank. It's a dead switch. It does nothing. Nothing happens. Typically, we don't really want our students to associate switches with doing nothing. But if it is labeled as a blank switch, then that is still communicating that meaning. Similar thing for environmental control. Label one of your buttons or your switches as a blank. It represents nothing. And then when you click that, it does nothing. This is technically controlling that second outlet, but you just don't plug anything in. And then there's no feedback, so it does nothing, and that's your blank. Same thing for switched out to toys. Okay, so now that we've done something over nothing to teach correct over incorrect, but in actual choice making, we typically do have alternative viable options. So this next step is being able to discriminate between correct and incorrect as we introduce a more reasonable alternative. So we start with a distractor item that is very different. We want this to be easy. We want our students to succeed. So something totally different that won't trip them up. And then gradually progressing over time so it's a little more similar, but less obviously wrong. Then similar, but maybe a bit more boring. And then finally similar, reasonable, and just as interesting. And this is a very, very gradual process. In the next examples, you'll see how one question can kind of be changed to follow this process. But you're not just going to do this one right after the other. It's a lot of activities with very different, then slowly getting more similar. But this is just what one question could look like over time and how your distractor item can change. And we're just going to go through these quickly. So just some examples. Again, I can send you guys the slides so you can look at these in more detail. Okay, so where were we? Oh, whoops. Okay, so now we've done early error choice making also. So now we're at these last two steps where we can start increasing the cognitive challenge of the question or increasing the amount of distractor items. So we're going to start with talking about increasing the cognitive challenge. As I said at the beginning, we want to start very simple, very easy, very familiar and engaging. Now we can start making that a little more difficult. So how might we do that? So starting with very familiar, then getting less familiar. So maybe not something that's, if they're dinosaur obsessed, maybe you're doing dinosaur stuff at first, and now maybe you're kind of pulling away from that a little. Then you can get more abstract, and then finally into kind of your knowledge-based questions. So for a Mickey and Minnie example, we've got our familiar characters. Again, this would work best for someone that's Disney obsessed. If you've got students that are, again, dinosaurs, superheroes, princesses, whatever they're into. But this is a question like that. So it could be, where's Mickey is your simple familiar. Starting to get a bit more abstract. Who's wearing a bow? It requires you to kind of interpret the image. And then who has a dog named Pluto? So requiring knowledge. With real world items, you can make your questions about just about anything. I'm going to skip through this quickly. I will talk about this example with classmates. So again, this could be very familiar and simple of find Brody or find Emmy, but you can also make it into something that's more abstract or sharing an opinion. So if you're doing, you could ask questions about who has this kind of hair, or getting into more abstract, it could be if you're doing class superlatives at the end of the year. Who do you vote for class clown? So it's that you're not getting that immediate reward feedback. So when you're doing this, make sure that you're repeating that selection back to them. But again, so yeah, just changing your questions. Some more examples. Sorry, I'm really having to go through this quickly. So finally, increasing your number of response options. Again, things to keep in mind. Just cognitive skills. Can they cognitively understand multiple things? And access skills. Can they physically access 3? So particularly with switch communicators, can they get to all 3 of those? And then again, with your distractor item, just as when we first added our distractor item, we made it very different and then gradually more similar. When you're adding in more distractor items, kind of trying to follow that same process. So here's what a choose it maker activity looks like with 3. On the left, we've got an errorless question. On the right, we have errored. In terms of access, again, just if you're using eye gaze, these boxes are now smaller. Or if you're targeting with touch screen, these are smaller boxes. So that's one of those access things to keep in mind. So again, with speech generating switches, this is where it gets a bit more complicated. So one option would be to have 3 physical switches like we have on the left. So you can have 3 Big Macs. This is a smooth talk with an external switch and then a second smooth talker. But you really can't do this on, you can't have one switch for each message unless you start using multiple devices. On the right, we have auditory prompt mode. That's where that comes in really well. Again, you can scan through all of your message options. So whether it's 3, 8, 12, however many you have, you scan through with your external switch and then select with your main switch. This is the activity. So very briefly, 8 buttons. You can record your own message into each of those. So you can have 8 messages, each with their own switch. So that is one way that you could do that. Environmental control, kind of making it more than 3 options gets a little bit difficult because your actual unit only has 2 outlets. So unless you have two of these units, you could do that to add more. Switch it out to toys, you just have to physically add more than 3. Online activities, and then question and answer. Okay, so finally, sorry, I know we skip through a lot of that at the end there. I can send anyone that you want, I can send you these slides. And if you have any questions more specifically about some of the stuff that we skipped over or want any more detail, I'm more than happy to answer any of your questions. I do apologize about how fast this ending was. But yeah, so that is the whole thing. That's what this roadmap looks like. Some important things to remember. It's just a guide. Adjust it based on what you think, what will work for your students. Again, you're the ones that know their needs. Also, bouncing around in the progression, go back to stuff that you've already done. Like, it's not just following it all the way through. And again, varying the devices that you use. So do some environmental control. Do some switch adapted toy play with a student who's not typically a switch adapted toy user. Just mixing it up and providing an assortment. And probably most importantly, just give opportunities for choice making in everything. Find ways to make choices. Annoy people with how much you are finding opportunities for choice making. But make it genuine, make it authentic, and embed it in the day. So yeah, that's the roadmap. And then this is my information. Please feel free, like I said, to email me if you want a copy of the slides. Just send me an email and I'll send that over. I do hope it was helpful. I know that we really rushed through some of that. And again, I'm sorry, like I said, it was an hour presentation typically, and I thought I'd done a better job of shortening it down. But I do hope you found it helpful, and that you can take away something that you can use with your students. And again, please reach out to me for any questions, comments, feedback. Would love to hear what you guys say. So thank you so much for listening. And there's just some associated resources. So, okay. Okay, thank you. Let me move it back to, oops. Oh, I can't. Okay, let me try and get this screen back up. I don't think you guys can see my screen. Resume share. There we go. That's my information. All right, thank you.